One of the most common questions I get as a book reviewer here on the channel is, what is the most difficult kind of review to do? Is it the overtly positive or the extremely negative? Maybe somewhere just along the middle space. And the answer is none of those three options, and we as adults all know that the entire concept review is broader than a 1 to 10 scale, as useful as it can be to boil it down to that at times, right? There are stories that are going to profoundly impact you as an individual, maybe able to communicate emotions you yourself can't even entirely put into words. And that can even happen in a story that you don't particularly like. So where does that fall on 1 to 10? And then there are books that you think are technically incredibly well done, but maybe there's just some fundamental flaw that you can't entirely agree with or get over. I would say all of those are more difficult to handle than just something that's straightforward, positive, or just negative. But the most difficult for me are books that are trying to accomplish a specific thing, do manage to accomplish it, and I enjoy the experience, but there's something missing, an absent ingredient that for me would really complete the dish. With it not being there, I can't help but feel left down, while still really enjoying the entire experience. That becomes really frustrating to communicate, right? Because there's this additional hurdle where a lot of people, when they consume a review, want to just boil down to what you're saying to a 1 to 10. And I've noticed people tend to go on the negative side if they can. They just assume, oh, we had this big problem, therefore let's put it like a 4, when like if I had to choose, it would be higher than that. That's where it becomes the most difficult to formulate a review. But that framing I'm going to now use to begin talking about The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. With the tagline, "A magical island, a dangerous task, and a burning secret," The House in the Cerulean Sea tells the story of an orphanage examiner, caretaker, checker-upper, Linus Baker, caseworker for the department in charge of magical youth. And Linus in this story is presented to us as a fastidious man taking a part in a large bureaucratic process, doing his absolute best to genuinely look after magical youth, who are treated as a discriminated against group within this world. But due to Linus's history of being able to give objective reports on orphanages regardless of the circumstances, he is chosen to go to an orphanage for magical youth that is more special than the rest. And if I had to summarize the rest of the story in a clickbaity YouTube attention-getting way, it would be gayer X-Men meets softer 1984. And let's get into the X-Men part of that first. I say gayer because, one, X-Men in its publication has a long history of being an allegory for discriminated against youth or just other minority groups in general. Hence the X gene coming to such popularity when the gay gene was such a headline getter, except the children that Linus is meeting at this orphanage are more in line with traditional fantasy creatures. For example, there is a gnome character, a sprite, a wyvern, an undefinable green blob, a were-Pomeranian, and the real reason he's been sent there, and my second favorite character of the story, the Antichrist. Lucy. The Antichrist's name is Lucy. And this gets into maybe my favorite area of this whole story, and that would be the world building. Yeah, there's an Antichrist here. There's also a whole lot of references to things from our real world in this fantastical one. But in the tradition of like It Follows, there's not really an exact year I would put from our world into The House in the Cerulean Sea. And it's certainly an alternate history, so you'll have mentions of Buddy Holly, and Linus uses a record player. I actually kind of love this style of world building, the ones that feel like just a slightly warped mirroring of our own universe. It allows so much free real estate for the author to just kind of get and bring on in for safe assumptions for the reader, but then pick through and add those twists that enhance the story exactly how it needs to be. It's a blurry Venn diagram of what exact books fall in here. You can make a weak case for his dark materials for sure, and then like smack dab dead in the center of it would be things like the Dresden Files, which pretty much like are our world with the same presidents, but you just slide underneath some supernatural existence. House of the Cerulean Sea kind of exists in the middle ground where a lot is different, but a lot is the same. The point where, yes, let's transition to this 1984 side of things. There is a big brother government. I mean, Linus Baker is working for the department in charge of magical children. And it's not a harmless organization. In fact, I would say psychologically, the environment that is created in this government has resulted in Linus unknowingly operating in a very depressed state. We meet him when his life is just a live repeat of the same menial task again and again, and one that he has found purpose in, but I wouldn't say has found joy. He lives in a small apartment, and by the end of the setup, I was just thinking of Ed Norton from Fight Club, which is not Linus Baker at all.
Gonna need you out of town a little more this week. We got some red flags to cover.
It must have been Tuesday. He was wearing his cornflower blue tie.
But there's that kind of same numb feeling occurring until, yes, he is invited by extremely upper management, that is actually their name, to be sent on this special mission to look into the orphanage that is hosting the Antichrist. And it's run by an interesting Charles Xavier twist named Arthur Parnassus. Parnassus, dyslexia. My biggest criticism I'm going to get into later is going to tie back to this 1984 angle, but before we get into the negatives, I want to continue with setting up the story and the positives. And my next big piece of praise is going to be the character work of Linus Baker as he arrives at this orphanage after the setup, because he is a not self-hating gay man, but one that is clearly not out proud and fighting for it. I kept being reminded of David from 6 Feet Under. He is a part of a system that is treating a represented minority group poorly. But at this orphanage that is run by a Charles Xavier stand-in, setup, twisting of, Linus is finally able to start accepting himself and be appreciated for who he is by another group of odd people. As in the real world, the oddest people are often the best people. And this is really what makes you fall in love with Arthur. He comes into this situation with preconceptions, stereotypes in his head, and he has to overcome those by not ignoring the reality directly right in front of him, which sounds like it should be easy, but we all know is surprisingly difficult for people in the real world. They will see something and go, no, I'm sticking with my preconception. Obviously, this department of looking after magical children and extremely upper management are stand-ins for the bureaucratic, institutionalized, real-world discrimination we see happening all around us. There is the other side of it as well, the visceral bigotry that trickles upward to create those things. Nearby this orphanage, across the sea, there is a village that is quite nervous hearing of what is on this island. And there's a couple secrets to be revealed of how this orphanage got set up and the history of it I won't spoil here. And what this turns into is an incredibly sweet telling of the found family trope. And if that sounds a bit simple for a setup of a story, that's going to transition into my big issue with the House in the Cerulean Sea. I liked it. I actually think there is phenomenal character work here. Everyone has sensational personalities. The themes are well explored, all needed and crucially examined at pinnacle climactic plot beats to feel remarkably satisfying. It's just that the conflicts often felt a bit toothless. And on top of that, when there's this 1984-esque government that could also have parallels drawn to like 100 other antagonists in the histories of fiction, but just saying, yes, it is that kind of like institutionalized oppressive government feel, it simultaneously felt like a remarkably toothless, clawless example of that kind of threat. There are reports given from Linus to extremely upper management and responses that are given to him, but they feel so disconnected from what's happening in the actual text, and things go so smoothly at the actual orphanage that there's no real point where I felt like we had any chance of any kind of ending anywhere near as dark as 1984. But don't get me wrong, I wasn't expecting that kind of ending to this book. I just would have liked some tension, a little bit of that violin going to get my hackles up. But instead, this story is sweet. I'm talking, you start with a bowl of sugar, add in just some whipped cream world building on top where, yeah, it's well done, it's nice and transformative, but I could use something a bit less sweet. But once we start getting into the character development, all you're doing is dumping some heavy cream, which again, nice, but I want something with a bit more substance. Though, once we get to the big plot reveals towards the end, yeah, those are some nice raspberries that at least were enjoyable and added texture, but at no point was I feeling like there was some oomph to the story. No grenade about to go off, gun under the table, and at most, any threat here could be summarized as kind of just a dull knife with maybe some more whipped cream put underneath as we get Linus having so many realizations about himself. And I again just want to stress how strange it is to have this type of antagonist that does have such a rich history in literature feel so lame duck. Because there's not really any violence done towards Linus while he's in his office. And I don't mean that in like a fight, punch, bash way. More in just like the worst that happens to him is someone's a little bit verbally abusive in his direct manager. And extremely upper management just kind of says his accolades, tells him to stay in his place, and is authoritative. But there's no subtle violence. There's no implication of worse beyond just how depressing it is. Which I get is the point, but that doesn't really change how I end up feeling about it in the story. I say that while liking the romance that's going on, while believing in the found family, and having genuinely emotions pulled from me by some of the children's overarching character growth, by the relationships established between Linus and the children he's beginning to love and care about. I mean, the casualness of the profound impact of the typewriter scene, if you know, you know, that like straight up just had tears coming out of my eyes due to parallels I was able to draw to people I know in real life who just needed that bit of encouragement and someone believing in them. Scene to scene, it's so nice. It's just once you pull back at all and look at the full context of the book, I needed something to feel a bit more like an oomph on the page. Even a burning secret that's mentioned in the initial pitch. It's kind of just introduced, a few chapters later resolved. It makes you slightly reframe, look at a character, but not even that much because you already think of them so positively. There's just a tinge of sadness underneath now that by the time there's like this climactic conflict with the local village that has paranoia around this group of magical kids being so close to them, even there, I just knew the situation was going to be resolved with words peacefully and maybe like a kind of impressive display. And after I called it, it happened. The only times this book was able to surprise me was when I didn't think it would go as positive with a certain direction, and then it would. And once I readjusted the gears of my mind to understanding that's the kind of story that's being told, then I started seeing all of it coming. That is not to say I don't understand what the author's trying to write. This is trying to be a very positive, heartwarming story, an idealistic view of the beginnings of change a lot of people would love to see in this world. And the deliberate defanging of a 1984 type antagonist is not an accident. I don't think the author wanted you to think at any time like soldiers are going to kick open the door with guns and we'll have like the X-Men mansion being raided.
You want to shoot me? Shoot me! Don't shoot him!
It's just, I personally prefer, even in my young adult books that I consume here on the channel, a little bit of bite. Something that I think can challenge the reader on that tension emotional level. And I also want to emphasize that does not mean there is not nuance here. I think this book has a remarkable amount of nuance when it comes to handling conversations around the deep-seated hatred and perverse acts you can see from people who are claiming to do the righteous good by acting out against those that they deem other. Because yeah, there's that systemic, bureaucratic angle to it above through extremely upper management, but there's also these people who are the source of the upward trickle of hatred forming those institutions that are way more active on the ground, willing to put hands on a child and then claim they were defending themselves when they started bothering someone to begin with. My neighbor told me my mom was going to hell for being gay when she came out, and it's just in hindsight, what a weird would say that to like a young teenager about that teenager's parent. I couldn't imagine. What the hell's wrong with that person? If I remember correctly, my response when she said that was just Right.
Okay, all right, moving on.
I also really love the nuances added to Linus Baker's life at the beginning of the story. Not only is he a bit overweight and uncomfortable in his body, not only does his neighbor suck ass and make him uncomfortable, and where he's even sent on excursions is some of the most depressing places you can be sent. Abusive orphanages being reported. Oh my God. Someone even comments that his cat is his wife and best friend, and I cannot think of a sadder thing for someone to say about my life. And I say that as someone with 2 cats who loves them dearly, but his characterization comes through in that he's still doing a damn good job of his job in spite of all of that. And he's found purpose in what he's doing, despite how sad it can make him. He's driven, he's determined, he is remarkably ethical. And the immediate impact of him being sent to this orphanage, it being essentially a paradise for him on arrival in terms of how beautiful it is and reflective of a beach he has on like a small desk mouse pad back in his office, you get where it's going, right? The second you meet Arthur, you're like, they're gonna fall in love, and they do. But that's not to say the chemistry's not good. The building of their tension and romance is palpable. You feel it. You want them to. It's just as soon as it happens, you're gonna go, yep. In fact, I would say the emotion throughout this entire story is palpable. The children are just overflowing with youthful innocence and remarkably well-written child dialogue so that you really believe in their vulnerability, despite one of them being, and I want to emphasize this, the literal Antichrist. Labels don't matter. It's not about the preconception you have. It's about the reality in the page, the person you are meeting that is Lucy. Yeah, there's people who have told Lucy their entire existence that they're going to end up like destroying the world and their nightmares are causing awful things to happen within the orphanage, but that's just a kid having a night terror. And in so many of like the local townsfolk's problem with the children can just be summarized with the response like, that's not your concern. Like, you don't got to care about that at all. You go over here, you do your business. This is the business that's not harming you in any way, shape, or form. What's your problem? Which, again, is just what so many people have to deal with all the time. And the oh so fundamental understanding of how preconceptions and prejudice can unfortunately inform and shape reality, which is a studied phenomena, of course, we are all familiar with. Surprise, surprise, if you treat people like shit, if you take advantage of them, if you do not educate them and you think less of them, you are going to impact how they are able to exist. And then, of course, there's a cycle to that. Fortunately, the message in A House in the Cerulean Sea is that a little bit of love, a little bit of compassion, a little bit of understanding, a little bit of change is so much more powerful than a lot of hate. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about the ending of the book here and get into some minor spoilers just to fully contextualize what I meant by a lack of threat and how this could have been personally improved for me. Because no, I'm not trying to encourage like having an FBI open up moment in a book or having like children going on harmless fun adventures together. I understand the appropriateness of tone, but I would have liked a little bit of Pride and Prejudice added into my gayer X-Men being watched over by toothless 1984. We're getting weird with these comparisons now. Arthur and Linus, yeah, their relationship is very central to the narrative. And towards the end, Linus's assignment is over after a big showdown with the local town. And he's got to go, right? Because he has to give his final report and talk to extremely upper management about his position. And we're asked to buy into this conflict of like, he's got to go do his job and he's never going to come back. But we all know he is. Like, it is so obvious. I'm not spoiling shit. Like, it is painfully apparent he's not going to go stay in his shitty apartment next to his annoying neighbor and just forget about the profound experience he had here and the man he's fallen in love with. But it's treated as a conflict. And when he eventually returns to the island, it's treated as a conflict where it's like, are they going to forgive him? Why? Why would they be mad to begin with? He literally just left to make sure the orphanage will never be shut down, was their hero, it won't be. And why is anything acting like there's conflict? Just some minor tweaks here about requirements, adding in a couple like real, oh, he might not be able to return for XYZ insert reason moments could have added a lot more nail-biting tension at the end that I think even in a very deliberately sweet story like this could have had exponential benefit overall. Because while I enjoyed the scene of the story playing out, when everything was attempted to be tied in at the end, It felt loose. It didn't feel tight. Some of the best young adult stories, some of the best overtly and deliberately sweet stories of all time can still have very real character-to-character conflict. And a lot of it either felt forced or manufactured, which was disappointing. While I love the positive aspects of the relationships going on here, I really did enjoy the relationship blooming between Arthur and Linus, and I cannot stop picturing Linus text tips, which is just not right. That final secret really should have been a bomb. Something beyond just making Arthur look even better as a character to really add some at the end of this book, really sweep the legs of the reader so that when that very positive final couple beats happen where Linus is back and there's a bit of a sequel bait going on, I, as the reader, am going to be more motivated to continue into the next story, to believe something really negative could happen here, instead of just being like, okay, it's going to be Legends and Lattes 2, where I'm sure I'll enjoy the ride, but I'm not going to have that full emotional roller coaster, and instead, more of an emotional paddleboarding, which, as I'm going to say, is what I believe this book was deliberately trying to be, and the correct answer for the execution of that. And all of those things being said, let's push the story and characters out of the way to address the fact that this is also just beautifully written. TJ Klune has quite the ability with the pen, and the prose of this story are going to be something that many people should look at to improve their own, and a phenomenal example of how a story with lower stakes can still be immensely engaging just because you as a reader are enjoying the reading experience of it. We actually talked about this a bit in my recent Hobbit video, where like there are flaws you can point at in The Hobbit, but you feel like a dick doing it because it's so prettily written. The House on the Cerulean Sea also managed to avoid a big mistake with humor. Not only did it succeed in being genuinely funny, but at the same time, the jokes felt appropriate for the characters to find funny or not. There were some times where the jokes were just too wholesome, too cute, but they never really bothered me because, one, you're joking with a child a lot of the time, and it felt extraordinarily appropriate and distinct between the characters. Developing a sense of humor for a specific character is an under-discussed major part of characterization that TJ Klune nailed. Overall, if I have to boil it down to that thin lens, I think I'm feeling like a strong 6 to a light 7, closer to that 6 than that 7 for The House in the Cerulean Sea, but I'm very happy I read it. And if I was in a depressed part of my life, if I wasn't actually just very happy right now, I maybe could have appreciated what I was going for a bit better, but I'm feeling some claws and teeth. And so for my next story, I'm hoping to find that in Chuck Tingle's Bury Your Gaze, which is going to be our Halloween special. Anyway, all, thank you so much for tuning into this book review. Let me know what you'd like to see me review next here on the channel, and like and subscribe if you have not already. Be sure to grab one of the TBR shirts before our merch run ends here, and have a good one, y'all. Peace.